Okay, guys, welcome to the last week of school. This topic's going to be over mostly civil rights, but I will go ahead and mention the baby boomers and why that's significant even today. So let's go ahead and dive into this real quick. All right, so we generally call the baby boomers this generation of children that were born immediately following World War II. Let you guys figure that one out. It was just a sudden increase of births. More children are born. So this whole generation, you guys have heard this a lot, saying "Okay, boomer" and all this. And this mostly refers to the people who were born between 1946 and 1964. Generally, that's going to refer to the kids who were, or I'm sorry, to most people who are retired now, which is why there's some sort of social discontent between the generations because they're retired, they grew up in a different time and stuff. But that's when you hear somebody say, talk about baby boomers, we're generally talking about this generation of people born within this time. All right. So it also can, the reason why this is significant to civil rights is because it led to the growth of what we call suburbs. Suburbs are basically home settlements, home towns that are specific just to living. Okay, they don't really have like a downtown area with the big buildings and all of that. They're mostly just homes. They're generally set outside of major cities, and it's kind of during this time of the 50s and 60s. If you live out there, it's almost a sign of wealth. Like you've made it to the middle class. You're stable. Okay, so some different definitions I want you guys to know about. Civil disobedience. Okay, this is just basically refusing to obey civil laws. All right, now notice this is saying disobedience. Okay, it's not saying civil unrest. It's not saying civil rioting or anything like that. It's just refusing to obey civil laws. And the reason why this is significant is because there's going to be a lot of laws during the civil rights movement that are, they're wrong. And so people are going to go against that. They're going to fight that law by using different measures. And one of those measures is through nonviolent resistance. Okay, you're not being passive. You're not just allowing things to happen, but you are responding in a nonviolent way. You are resisting these laws in a nonviolent way. And finally, segregation. Okay, this is the practice that separates people according to race. Okay. All right. So the Declaration of Independence. Okay, this is our a symbol of our country, and within the first line of it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, there's a lot of common misconceptions, when we talk about the founding fathers and these beliefs of liberty and freedom and what it means to be free. This line right here, all men are created equal. It wasn't lost on them. It wasn't lost on people like Thomas Jefferson that they were sitting here saying these things and then owning slaves. Jefferson struggled with this his whole life. But the fact of the matter is this, is that, like I told you guys a million times before, this is just the way they thought. Okay, it wasn't a difference between saying like, oh, we're all humans. There was this true belief that if you were of a different race, then you were a different almost species. Okay, and so, but this still holds so much value for so many people. Okay, and it's going to be that sort of beacon that people will rally around when the civil rights movement takes off. Okay, Frederick Douglass. I'm kind of going to breeze through these because it's not significant to the time, but when we talked about a little bit about Frederick Douglass, okay, he was born a slave, he escaped at about the age 20, and then he became one of the most prominent members of the abolitionist movements. He created the abolitionist newspaper, the North Star, based out of New York, and he became the editor of it. He met with Lincoln. Okay, so he was a big spokesman for the abolitionist movement during the Civil War. Harriet Tubman, love this lady. All right, I gave you guys, for some of you guys, I told you a lot about her already, but I just want you to know that she's significant because she helped people helped slaves escape through what we call the Underground Railroad. Remember, it's not a literal railroad. They call it that because it was just a way to get people from one location to the next, usually to northern states, even into Canada. And she made it happen. Amazing story. I suggest you guys, the movie Harriet does a really good job of sort of portraying her. Okay, John Brown, just real quick. Remember, I told you this guy's a lunatic, but he fought for a good cause, and eventually, during the Bleeding Kansas episode, he murdered 5 slave owners brutally. He tried to incite a slave revolt, and he considered himself a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Now, even Frederick Douglass kind of stepped back from him. He said he believed his cause was just, but the way that he was going about it with that violent manner was just, it didn't do them very good. Okay, so the amendments. We remember these, don't we? 13, 14, 15. We call these the Reconstruction Amendments. 13th Amendment, abolish slavery. That created more problems, so what do we do to fix that? We guarantee citizens equal protection under the laws. All citizens are equal. 14. Finally, the 15th, right to vote regardless of race. Regardless of race. Notice that doesn't say gender. Remember, women don't get the right to vote until much, much later. Okay, so one of the things about civil rights is the Supreme Court cases that sort of shape the laws. All right. Now, this is going to begin with what we call Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, this is a very, it was a very debated and argued court case. And the reason why it's debated is because it essentially created what we call Jim Crow law. Okay, so in 1892, a gentleman by the name of Homer Plessy was jailed. He was put in jail for sitting in what we call the white car. Okay, so this is in Louisiana. All right, so we're in the deep South, and even before we had a name for it, people in the South were segregating races. So if you were African American, you couldn't sit on this side of the car. You had to sit in the back, or you couldn't even enter in some places. Okay, well, he kind of challenged that, and he gets arrested for it. And so in response to that, it becomes this law case, and it goes all the way to the National Supreme Court, all the way to the top, whereas the lawyers argued that separate cars violates that 13th and 14th Amendments, okay, equal citizenship, right? Where he's no longer a slave and he's considered an equal citizen. Well, the Supreme Court rules in Plessy versus Ferguson that even though that they are separated from one another, that African Americans couldn't enter this car, they were still equal. All right, doesn't make any sense, but it was a product of the time, and so Plessy versus Ferguson rules separate but equal. Okay, and what this is going to do is sort of give a legal foundation for what we call Jim Crow laws. All right, I told you guys way back when we talked about the Civil War that it failed. Reconstruction failed. Okay, this is one of those major failures right here. You end up having another 60 years of inequality and fighting, all because it could have been stamped out right here. But no, it wasn't. And so what you end up with is a legal foundation for Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws are basically what we call the laws of segregation. All right, this law of saying like, okay, whites are only allowed here. African Americans can't come into this. They have to stay there. They can't do this. They can't be a lawyer. They can't be a banker. And so we call those Jim Crow laws. All right. So this is sort of an example of that in action. Okay, Rex Theater for colored people, meaning on the other side of town there might be a white theater, and there would be no African Americans allowed in that theater. Okay. Here's another example. This is sort of an early water fountain. Okay. Can't even drink out of the same water fountain. All right. Couldn't go in through the front door. They had to come in through the back. All right, the Dallas bus station. This is a picture of somewhere pretty close to home here. All right. See right there, you've got separate waiting areas for African Americans. Well, look how happy they are. It's just unfortunate. Another sign in a Texas restaurant. Now, and one thing I want to extend is that when we talk about the civil rights movement in the South, it wasn't just limited to African Americans, okay? Mexican Americans were being treated very, very similarly, okay? All right, the NAACP. So this is the National Association for the Achievement of Colored People. A lot of famous civil rights movement leaders are involved with the NAACP, probably the most famous being Martin Luther King. It's created by a guy named W.E.B. Du Bois, and its whole purpose is to fight for equality. All right, Brown versus the Board of Education. Okay, this was a 7-year trial that this young girl, Linda Brown, she had to travel through a train to get to the bus stop. She basically had to go this really long roundabout way to get to a school, to get to the all African American school, when just a few blocks away was the white school. And so this is going to get challenged by Linda Brown's family, and the NAACP is going to get involved. Another gentleman by the name of Thurgood Marshall is going to be the lawyer for this family. All right, and it is a landmark case. Okay, this is this right here, Brown versus the Board of Education. Little Linda Brown. This is going to become one of the biggest cases in U.S. history, because what it does is it essentially declares that segregation in public schools is illegal. All right, and this is 1954. So remember, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1892. Okay, that rules that it's okay to separate races. It gives foundation to the Jim Crow law. And then this one right here, Brown versus the Board of Education, is going to do the opposite. Okay, it's going to say, no, in fact, this is not right. This is not legal. Okay, and so what happens across all southern states that are practicing Jim Crow laws is they now have to desegregate, meaning that practice of keeping races separate, we now have to integrate African Americans into our schools. We have to take down those signs saying whites only. And there's going to be a lot of backlash to this. There's going to be a lot of people who protest. Okay? This is somebody holding that sign about the court ruling. All right, Thurgood Marshall, let's talk about him. Okay, he was the lawyer who fought for Linda Brown, and he's going to be the first African-American Supreme Court justice. So a justice of the Supreme Court, they're basically the top judges of the Supreme Court. Okay, it's a lifelong appointment. Once you make it there, you're in it for life. Okay, you can't run for you can't campaign for it. You can't try to get votes for it. You have to be appointed. Okay, so it's a big deal if you make it, and Thurgood Marshall did it. One of the things I do want to talk about is that Texas, or I should say really this area, Dallas-Fort Worth, when you look at other states like Alabama, Louisiana, and Arkansas, Texas was fairly peaceful when we desegregated. All right, there was a couple of issues. In fact, Mansfield High School was probably the most significant, and for the life of me, I was trying to find some images and trying to find some more information on that, but it seems to not exist. But Mansfield High School, the Mansfield Tigers, that high school actually had to have a military presence there to desegregate the school. There was almost a riot. But the Little Rock Nine, all right, this is up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and so after the Brown versus Board of Education saying that segregation is illegal, so schools have to start doing it, and there's a lot of pushback, all right? And many states aren't following it, okay? In fact, the governor of Alabama, a guy by the name of George Wallace, he sort of becomes the forefront runner for resisting federal law of desegregating. And so in 1957, okay, just 3 years after the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education, 9 African-American students are supposed to be integrated into Central High School in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. And, I mean, it's a powder keg, meaning it's about to explode. People are, rioting, they're angry. And so President Eisenhower, he's the United States president at the time, he actually sends in federal troops, the 101st Airborne Division, to help integrate these 9 students, okay? And it's all over the United States newspapers. It's a big deal. And here's that image. And I like this image because it just, I mean, look at the anger on this girl's face. I mean, it's just, it's mob rule, you know? And I told you guys that it's just one of those things where this is a product of their environment. You know, this is a product of your environment, but I love the resolve on her face too. And they did it. They were integrated. Probably wasn't a pleasant experience, but they did it, and it's a big deal. Here's some more images of the 101st there. That's the Screaming Eagle patch, for those of you that don't know what that is. And they're escorting the students in. Okay. Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks was actually involved with the civil rights movement. She was integrated with them, but why she's significant is in December of 1955, she refused to. So African Americans were supposed to sit at the back of the bus, all right. And what happened was there was actually an incident that had happened before Rosa Parks, where she was this young girl who was pregnant at the time. This young African American girl who was pregnant. She was basically put in the same situation where she was sitting in the front and she was told to go to the back, and the word got around. So what Rosa Parks does is she does the exact same thing. And she sits in the front of the bus and she's told to move, but she refuses. Okay? And what that ends up leading to is what we call the Montgomery bus caught. This happened in Montgomery, Alabama. All right? A lot of problems in Alabama. And she refuses to get up. And so whole groups of African Americans, they refuse to ride the buses. They boycott it for more than a year, and people are gonna start finding other ways to get to work. And it hurts the bus because that's where a lot of their clientele come from. All right, and the Supreme Court, it gets back up to the Supreme Court, and they rule segregation on Montgomery buses is illegal. So ultimately, what I want you guys to know about this is that this just shows that, you know, that people were able to do things just by the most menial things. All right, they don't want to let us ride on the buses and sit where we want to sit. Well, we're just not going to ride their buses, and look what it does. All right. Martin Luther King. Okay, he's a Southern Baptist member, and he's a big proponent of this nonviolent protest. Okay, and one of the things I like about this is, remember, when you look at these, when you look at some of the stuff of what's happening. Remember, the media is everywhere. People are taking images. People are looking at stuff. We're seeing a lot of things happen. And what do you think sends a bigger message here? Seeing on TV, all right, people being rioting and fighting, and African American groups fighting back, or just sitting there and being beaten up and taken? Who's going to get the sympathy there? The people who are fighting, or the people who are just standing there? All right. Martin Luther King, he's going to get arrested 38 times throughout his lifetime in his crusade for equality. Constant death threats, bomb threats. There's a really famous image of him pulling this burning cross out of his front yard in Atlanta. Okay, at the age of 38, he's going to be assassinated, and there he is right there. I think I told you guys this image right here is sort of what his memorial statue in Washington, D.C. looks like. It's him standing there and he's holding the U.S. Constitution, but his face is oriented towards the Jefferson Memorial. And it's really good. It's sort of, you know, him holding them accountable for their words and not following through with those ideals of freedom and liberty. Okay. There's Martin Luther King being arrested. Being arrested again. All right. And one of my favorite quotes by him: "Violence never solves problems. It only creates new and more complicated ones. If we succumb to the temptation of using violence in our struggle for justice, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness, and our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos." A lot of amazing words. All right, sit-ins. So basically, these restaurants that wanted to segregate, what people would do, African American groups, mostly college groups, and there were whites that were coming in from the northern states that were sort of helping out with this movement. They would go to these restaurants and they would just sit there. They wouldn't order anything. They wouldn't bring it. They would just take up seats and sort of disrupt their businesses. All right, so I kind of already explained that. I'm trying to keep this under 20 minutes, so let's see. There's one more slide I wanted to show you guys. Hold on. Okay, another form of protest is the marching. All right, people are going to march and form these massive groups and basically march on these cities where segregation is prevalent. And this is where you're going to see a lot of those images where people are being brutalized by the police in these areas. And so these are those images I was talking about. Okay, you've got these people who aren't fighting, they're not doing anything, being sprayed with a high-powered hose. So if you are suddenly, if you're unaware of the situation and then suddenly you see this image, who are you going to be sympathetic to? These firemen who are spraying people who aren't doing anything, or the people who are just being sprayed for being there? Okay, that's where your sympathy is going to lie. And that's sort of the logic behind nonviolent protesting. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up real quick. There are a couple of acts that are going to be passed in the 1960s, all right? So Lyndon B. Johnson, he's from Texas, all right? I told you guys that unfortunately, he's only ever remembered for the Vietnam War because he's the one who committed a lot more American troops to fighting the Vietnam War. And also, at the same time he was doing this, he actually did more for civil rights than any other president since Lincoln. Okay, he's going to be the one who pushes through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now remember, this is an election year, okay, 1964. So he's campaigning to get reelected to the presidency, all right? And this was highly controversial because you have a huge population in the South that aren't going to be happy with this, because what it does is it essentially makes it federally illegal for any kind of practice of segregation, all right? Okay, it has laws in it that say it's illegal for any discrimination in public facilities. It's illegal to not allow somebody to buy a house because of their race, and it's a landmark act. Okay, the Voting Rights Act, same thing. All right, no more. You can't deny somebody the right to act because of their race. That's finally what it is. Texas minorities finally have the power to elect representatives of their choice. Okay. All right, some famous leaders from Texas. Hector Garcia, he organizes the American GI Forum, a civil rights organization dedicated to securing rights for Hispanic Americans. Okay, he's going to push for equal medical care. All right, LULAC. We talked a little bit about that the other week. All right, LULAC is the first major group to fight segregation and inequalities faced by Mexican Americans. It's still around today. You guys can join it when you get up into high school. They have most high schools have the clubs. James Farmer, he's going to be the founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, very similar to what the NAACP does. He's going to be one of those big four, just like Martin Luther King. He's going to be one of the major leaders of the civil rights movement. In 1998, he's awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So just like the military has the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is the highest award military people can get, the Presidential Medal of Freedom is the highest honor that a citizen can get. All right. Henry Garcia, he's the first Mexican American elected to the Texas Congress in the 20th century. He also got elected to the He got elected to the Congress, the National Congress, House of Representatives. Barbara Jordan, first African American state senator in Texas. She's elected as president pro tempore of the Senate in 1972. Basically, what that is just she presides over the Congress. And she gave several significant speeches to the Democratic Convention in 1976 and 1992. And that's going to end it. All right, so for my final words for this semester, there's a couple of things I just want. For your assignment today, it's just got 2 questions. That's it. My final parting notes, I've enjoyed teaching you guys. The only things I could ever say to you guys is this. Always be curious and always ask questions. All right, don't ever stop trying to figure things out, okay? Don't stop. Don't be complacent with where you're at in life. Always ask for more, okay? It's been fun. You guys have a good summer.